Kate LaFalcia, welcome to Irish Granny Tarot. It's time for our Saturday book. And this week we have a book that's really it's a convergence. Convergence, the interconnection of extraordinary experiences. We've talked a lot here about things like near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, past life regression. Well, this book has it all. The authors, each author has an area of expertise. They cooperatively wrote the book. It's by Barbara Mango, PhD, LYNN MILLER, MS. I'm taking that to mean Master of Social Work. And then ERIKA MCKENZIE, RN, a nurse. And each of them has had some different variety of parapsychological type of experience, and they cooperated to write this book. So it's a collaboration. LYNN MILLER worked with Dr. Penny Sartori, and then with ERIKA MCKENZIE, the nurse, and then Barbara Mango, PhD. It examines extraordinary experiences from an experiencer's perspective and backed by science, because each of them is educated in science, medicine, those fields. It covers consciousness and its interconnection with paranormal phenomena. And I thought it would be a nice way to tie in a lot of things that we've looked at in one place. So these are real experiencers and experiences, and people report things like expanded sensory stuff, like vision that's 360. You can see all directions at the same time. Telepathy, inexplicable healings. So Penny, this would be the doctor, Penny Sartori, had anaphylaxis, which is a severe allergic reaction. Your blood pressure plummets, and then you get swelling of the airways, hives, that kind of thing. And if your blood pressure gets too low, combined with not being able to exchange oxygen, you can die. It can be fatal. And that's the kind of thing that people use the EpiPen for. Adrenaline, epinephrine actually will help stop it sometimes, or at least make it less severe. And then they'll give you steroids, but that doesn't matter. So anyway, she had this happen to her 4 times. She had 4 near-death experiences, if you can imagine that. Now, Barbara, who is the PhD, had past life recall that was paranormal. And Lynn, the Master of Social Work, had an out-of-body experience, actually has had many out-of-body experiences, and UAP contact. UAP is the fancy new term for UFO. And I think they just don't want people to get stuck in the image of a conventional, flying saucer, that kind of thing. They want people to realize that there are probably broader explanations for those sorts of phenomena that go beyond aliens. So these experiences had a powerful impact on their lives. And I should say, before I really get into this, I read this book about 6 months ago. I took these notes about 6 months ago. So we're all putting a lot of faith in my ability to read my handwriting. So hang on, it might get interesting. So these had powerful impact on their lives, and it moved all of them to start exploring the idea and researching the concept of non-local consciousness. Now, non-local consciousness, this is what touches on the books that we've read about Hermetic philosophy and plasma physics, and how interesting that all of these different things sort of converge. So this book itself is going to focus on 4 specific areas. UAP, that's unidentified aerial phenomena, contact. NDEs, near-death experiences, and OBEs, out-of-body experiences. Also, past life recall and past life regression therapy. And the authors believe that all of these things are connected. And I would agree that these are all experiences of one sort or another of an expanded consciousness and awareness of the real extent of our consciousness. These women have educations in biology, psychology, psychiatry, nursing, metaphysics, and education. The goal of this book is for readers to have an open heart and an open mind. They were very careful to research all of this stuff meticulously with science in mind. And they're addressing only what all three have experienced and exploring at the end of each topic, exploring personality traits that can make a person prone to one thing more than another or predisposed. And they believe that all these experiences are related to non-local consciousness, and they have numerous commonalities, which we'll see. So the foreword is written by ERIKA MCKENZIE, RN. She said that medical school she found to be very materialistic. This is working with doctors and looking at their education. Materialistic in the sense that if you can't look at it or experience it in some way with one of the five senses and measure it and study it and take data about it, then it can't really be real. And her point of view is that everything has, the doctors see everything as having to have, be made of matter and be mathematically analyzed. And they believe that consciousness is confined inside your brain. In other words, your brain creates your consciousness. This is what medical science, up until now, has believed. And then they have no explanation for the paranormal. But her research, she says, suggests that altered states of consciousness let us access the supernatural dimension of reality. In other words, there is something beyond the consciousness processed through the brain. Society labels these experiences as psychologically unstable experiences, that if you're imagining that you're seeing unidentified flying objects, or if you think you had a near-death experience or an out-of-body experience, it must have been the medication, it must have been the lack of oxygen, it must have been trauma or whatever. And they don't want to entertain the possibility that there's more to our reality. She says she has interviewed many of the people who've had these sorts of experiences. She says they're otherwise completely stable people, and I'm not saying that other than this experience, which is unstable, I'm just saying that they're telling stories, and these stories are coming from people who are stable in their lives. The number of people going through these experiences, or at least willing to report them, and I think that might be something to think about. People have been in the past reluctant in most contexts to talk about. There are some cultures and some religious systems where people are okay about talking about these things, but for the most part. And these people report very positive transformations as a result of these experiences. It can often give them a sense of purpose and value. I can't read my writing here, hang on. There are corroborations of this from our past, from history, from spiritual belief systems, from mythological writings, and cultural traditions that actually corroborate these experiences. These guys aren't the first people it's ever happened to. So this book may help change how you view reality, have a sense that if you're watching this, you probably are well on the way down that path already. In physics, there's what's called the unified field theory, which is the theory of everything. And in that theory, the paranormal is regarded as real, as these phenomena are regarded as real and not, And unfortunately, or fortunately, because it's intellectual challenge, they violate our present scientific accepted realities. Some paranormal phenomenon have been proven in the laboratory. For example, the research of Claude Swanson suggests the soul exists outside the body in an energy field, and it is the center of consciousness, and that it comes into the body through the brain and the nervous system so that we can interact with each other in a 3D world. So, chapter 1 is the introduction, and the question that they put out for us is the physical all that there is. There are a vast number of anomalous experiences that people have. We need to explore that there's a possibility of more beyond the physical. 10,000 years ago, roughly, there were reports of otherworldly phenomena and out-of-body experiences. And prehistoric art shows drawings of UFOs and drawings of ETs. And there's Renaissance art that shows UFOs in the background, and people have done all sorts of gymnastics trying to come up with explanations for what it really is. But you look at it, you show it to any kid, and they're immediately going to tell you, oh, that's, that's a UFO. In the Republic, Plato, in 380 BC, wrote what's considered the first official near-death experience account in Western civilization. He believed the soul separates from the physical body at death. Now, this was revolutionary for the time. But the Upanishads, 2,600 years ago, were from India, were early stories of reincarnation. So the idea that the soul, doesn't reincarnate or doesn't leave the body, this is kind of limited to Western civilization because other civilizations have entertained such notions a lot longer. In ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics from about 2000 to 3000 BCE, there are what look very much like UFOs and ETs. So these accounts are similar to many modern case studies. When you read these ancient accounts of out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences, sounds like something they did in a laboratory in, Indiana. It's very interesting. Mainstream science dismisses it all as hallucinations or lies or fantasy or oxygen deprivation or medication, some sort of chemical reaction. Quantum mechanics describes the interaction of atoms and subatomic particles, energy and matter, and they're getting more persuasive evidence that we live in a multidimensional universe with all anomalous phenomena interacting and interconnected via non-locality. So what does that mean? That means that we're made out of, subatomic particles that make atoms, that make molecules. They go this way, they get bigger, they make material, matter, but they also go in and make smaller and smaller and smaller. And there's, a universe in an atom, and that all of this potential energy, and I don't mean that in the sense of physics, potential, the possibility of energy interacts. And this says that consciousness is independent of time and space, that the brain is an intermediary between the spirit and the body. The brain is like a transit station where in comes your consciousness and it comes out your mouth. kind of terrifying to think about. The authors believe that non-locality is the link between near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, etc. Non-locality being this notion of your consciousness is not just in your brain. Dr. Waldo Vieira in 1986 had a theory that consciousness is multidimensional, and fundamental principles of conscientiology. So that it's multidimensional, that one consciousness is set in multiple vehicles depending on the dimension. That's kind of hard to wrap your head around. The physical dimension is the soma, the body. The ethereal dimension is the energosomia. I'm sure I said that wrong. Energosoma. It's the energy body. And another way of looking at that would be maybe chakras. And that non-physical dimensions are the psychosoma, the astral or spirit body. So you have the body, the ethereal body, and then the astral body, basically. And the mental dimensions are the mental body. So he's categorizing all the different kind of, layers of our consciousness. And this is a multi-existential situation, that this all existed before your actual physical body was born, and it will continue to exist after this physical body dies, and then it will manifest in the extra physical dimensions, employing these other vehicles, the energy soma and the mental soma and all the astral soma, so that the body is just one part of a larger system. Consciousness alternates in a serial fashion between periods in the physical incarnation, your lives, and the extra physical dimensions. So think of it in terms of, well, we go back to Dolores Cannon because we've covered so many of her books, and she has described at great length what people have told her after their soul is done with the particular body that it's in at this moment. There's a whole existence that continues after it sheds its body, and then it goes on to another body. So kind of the same thing. There's an evolutionary process, a manifestation from most basic to complex forms of lives that life continues and adapts. And I think what that was saying, it was that as many other books that we've read have reiterated, you don't start out as a human being and then you incarnate as a rock, that there's a sophistication and an evolutionary spiritual process to be continued and learned, so that you start out simple and it becomes more complex as you evolve. So you don't have to worry, you're not going to come back as a larva, but you're something more sophisticated. Evolutionary advancement is a primary driving force of consciousness. It's what it's all about. And it's independent of your physical brain. Pim van Lommel, I hope I said that right, is a cardiologist and a near-death researcher who says this: our brain may be compared both to a television set, receiving information from electromagnetic fields and decoding this into sound and vision, and compared to a television camera, converting or encoding sound and vision into electromagnetic waves. Our consciousness transmits information to the brain, and via the brain receives information from the body and senses. It's like a transport system. The function of the brain can be compared to a receiver. Our brain has a facilitating rather than a producing role. It enables the experience of consciousness. So the real question is, does consciousness have a biological basis at all? And it's impossible right now to prove or disprove. We don't know enough. Our ability to understand it and our ability to show it, they're both inadequate. It's like love. Consciousness is beyond the rationalizations of science. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So it must be experienced, and science can be revised as new evidence is acquired. That's the thing about science. It's not set in stone, and people get very huffy when scientists change their story about something. Well, that's the beauty of it. It evolves with knowledge, and as things are understood better or discovered or identified, science has the flexibility to widen the umbrella and include our better understanding of things. So these phenomena have life-altering effects, out of body, near death, etc., and are positive. They have proven to be positive for people because they widen our perspective, gives people a new worldview in which humanity works collectively for a higher purpose. I think that conversation has begun. Now, maybe I'm in a bubble. The people I interact with, people I hear from. But what I'm hearing from a lot of people is that this seems to be becoming more common. People are more willing to have these conversations and to entertain these notions. So chapter 2, embracing our uniqueness. The anomalous personality. Anomalous is something that's inconsistent with or deviating from the usual, irregular, unusual. And then here's a quote from Einstein, who was a bit of an oddball. Oddballs are good. Where did it go? Okay, he said, from the time I was verbal. Oh, this is not Einstein. This is Barbara. Oh, here's the quote. It's in the middle of it's like a meme, and it's in the drawing is why I didn't see it. The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. I just love that. That's wonderful. So experiencers often feel different, not normal, and they question their sanity because people look at you like you have three heads. If you tell them, I'm just pulling things out of the air here, pardon the pun. You tell them you've seen a ghost, or you've seen a UFO, or you've had a near-death experience, or you've astral traveled in your sleep, or you've had dreams that are not dreams, because that happens to me, and I'll tell people about them. And they're always really polite, unless they're my children, and they just scoff. But people will listen, and then they'll, you can tell that they think you're nuts. And it's becoming so much more common for people to have these experiences that it's time to question what's really anomalous and what's a human experience. So studies show that the people who report these things are not disturbed. They do psychological studies on them when they take these reports. They've got studies that they've developed where they'll take in the stories of near-death experiences, but they also psychologically evaluate the person for their level of stability. And no matter how often these people feel different, they've often had these experiences from very early in their childhood. Now, there are some quotations here from the authors that I want to read, because I think this is important to know. These women are all credentialed, educated professionals in fields of medicine and science. So Barbara, who has the PhD, from the time I was verbal, I knew I was different. What normal 2-year-old comprehends that other dimensions can exist beyond space and time? I received this information from a loving non-human entity who frequently visited me. I don't remember our conversations in detail. However, I know they concern space, time, the cosmos, and the meaning of existence. I spoke to beings only I could see, and I remembered past lives. I knew unequivocally that Earth was not my real home and merely a 3D construct. My mother once said to me, quote, "If I didn't remember giving birth to you, I'd never think you were mine. You are so different from the rest of us." I'll never forget that comment. Throughout my childhood, I felt like an unloved and misunderstood freak. Oh, that's so sad. This is Barbara. Then from Lynn. Lynn is the master of social work. From an incredibly early age, I had memories and visions of tunneling under the ground towards a huge structure. In this underground chamber were objects of great power and importance. Later, as I became more aware of the world, I realized this large structure was a Mayan pyramid. I never fit in with others. I spent most of my time alone exploring nature and my surroundings, looking for snakes and lizards. It wasn't until the 6th grade that I started to make friends and become more social. It's weird because I never really thought about this until I was asked to recall my early childhood. My real friends were animals and pets. And then Penny, and Penny is the doctor. The world has always seemed a malleable place for me. As a child, I thought everyone could drift off into that in-between place. It's so easy to pop out of my body between the waking and sleeping states. I flew all over our neighborhood and even saw items on rooftops that were later proven to be there. I sensed when someone was going to die. I received a phone call from my grandmother after her death. My mother was standing next to me when I answered the call. It was a strange, static-filled conversation. My grandmother asked to speak to my mother. I handed Mom the phone as though there was nothing strange about it at all. My poor mother nearly fainted at hearing my deceased grandmother's voice. These were normal happenings in my life, and not until my teen years did I realize that everyone else wasn't having similar sorts of occurrences. Dr. Kenneth Ring said that the personality types of near-death experiencers and contact experiencers, he studied them in what was called the Omega Project in 1990. And they have elements in childhood that predispose them to have these things and to recall them later. And there is an encounter-prone type of personality, someone who's distinctly spiritual, sensitive, ecologically oriented. And he asks the question, is it possible that these kinds of people are the next step in evolution? They frequently have undergone some sort of traumatic event, accident, illness, psychological shock, and or abusive childhoods, negative home environments. They have a susceptibility to experiencing non-pathological alternative realities and mild dissociation. And he says that you can do this. Most people do it. It happens to almost everybody. If you're on a long drive and you space out and then you realize, oh, I've been kind of daydreaming for a while, or you're driving the car and you don't remember really much about what you did to get where you were going. You just did it because you were on what they call automatic pilot. That's dissociation, and almost everybody does it. So according to medicine, there are 3 types of pathological dissociative states. Now, these are not what we're talking about when it comes to parapsychological stuff. This is what we're talking about when we talk about pathology. One is dissociative amnesia, which is a loss of memory from abuse or combat or trauma. You'll often hear people going through like an accident or a natural disaster that happens suddenly, like an earthquake or a tsunami. And they won't have a memory of part of it because the trauma is so extreme. Another one is depersonalization disorder, where you feel detached from your feelings and your thoughts, like you're watching a movie. You don't feel like you're really real. And you can feel unreal is the next sentence. The third is dissociative identity disorder. And in the past, this was called multiple personality disorder. It feels like maybe you're one or more people inside your body, and they've taken control, and they take turns taking control, and then you have gaps in your memory as one or the other or the other. Dr. Frank Putnam, a psychiatric professor, specializes in pathological dissociation. Expert on that. But there is such a thing as non-pathological dissociation. And this is an intelligent, creative survival strategy. This serves the functions of efficiency, economy of effort, the resolution of unreconcilable conflicts, the cathartic discharge of feelings, the submersion of individual ego for group identity. This is a bridge linking cognition and anomalous phenomena. So this is the genius who daydreams and doesn't remember a thing about what he's daydreamed about, but comes out of it with an artwork or an invention or a scientific theory at the end of it. And it's experienced as zoning out, daydreaming, mind wandering, talking to yourself. And all three authors describe these all their lives. And I'm talking to yourself. This cracks me up because my mother was very psychic. And my mother talked to herself all the time. She was perfectly stable, perfectly normal person, no weirdness. But you'd hear her talking in the other room, and you'd go in there, and nobody else was in there with her. And that's a form of how did he term it? Non-pathological dissociation. It just amused me. So there are 3 anomalous-prone personality types. Now, these are the kind of people who are more likely than not, statistically, to experience these weird phenomena. Weird, I don't think they're weird, but a lot of people think they're weird phenomena. So there's the anomalously sensitive person, the ASP. They have high levels of sensitivity. They're emotional. They have physiological reactions to things, cognitive reactions, altered states of consciousness, and experience sometimes metaphysical realms. They often have issues of physiological sensitivity. So you're talking about hypersensitive people who have autoimmune stuff going on, like maybe the person who is sensitive to chemicals like perfume, that kind of thing. These are associated with the kind of people who have these sorts of experiences. Often get written off, often get dismissed. Psychiatrist James Lake defines anomalous personality types in this way, quote, characterized by a propensity to have uncommon or unusual experiences, including paranormal experiences, mystical experiences, and transpersonal experiences. He additionally suggests that an anomalous-prone personality may be associated with increased neural and cognitive connectivity, as well as relatively greater creativity and increased vividness of mental imagery. And, as a result of this enhanced sensitivity, they experience the physical things in the world more sensitively too. Cannot take as much sound, cannot take as much light. I have a friend like that. She came over one day at Christmas when all of my children were here, and my grandchildren and sons-in-law, and a couple of extended family friends that they grew up with that are like my children. And it was just another day in chaos here. I didn't even notice it. And she just said, oh my God, how do you deal with the talk and the noise and the activity and everything going on? I didn't even notice it. She's just very sensitive. And we laughed. We laughed about it. And this can include about 5 million Americans. That's a pretty substantial number of people. In the holistic inventory of stimulus sensitivities, they will score very high on intelligence, imagination. They're forthright, self-assured, creative, curious, insightful, incorruptible. I thought that was interesting. And anti-authoritarian. And they can actually statistically trace these personality traits in people. There's something going on here that's not just in somebody's imagination. This is a real phenomenon. The higher percentage are left-handed, like 20 to 30% of them are left-handed. And this is usually below 10% in the general population. There's something going on here. There's a correlation with these anomalously sensitive people and the Myers-Briggs test. And this looks at personality types, like your introvertive, whatever, that test. These sensitive people are closely associated with intuition and introversion, which usually happens in about 4% of the population. These guys have a higher percentage. They also have a higher percentage of ESP, which happens in only 1% of the population, which I thought was shockingly low. I don't believe it. I think people report that they don't have it because they block it. That's my opinion. That's not in the book. Then there are the spiritual, metaphysical, and psychic people who have a strong interest in parapsychology, occultism, and esoterica, and they often feel misunderstood. These people are intelligent, independent, non-conforming, anti-authoritarian. Gee, what does that sound like? And they often are skilled musicians or writers. So there's something going on in the brain there. I was in science in college, and it's astounding. I mean, I noticed it then, and I think statistically this is true. High percentage of people in the medical field and scientific research, like doctors and people who get their PhD in research, are musicians. They all play the violin. They're all in the orchestra. It's fascinating. These sensitive people, and there is a study, a model called the Anomalous Sensitive Personality and Mind Styles Model that was created by Dr. Anthony Gregory. And he believes there are 4 learning thinking styles, and these experiencers tend to be abstract, random learners. They're good at sensing the vibes. They question a lot. They're endlessly question, and they can imagine the unseen. Personality types also include the second personality type, the highly sensitive person. This person is really sensitive to physical stimuli in the environment, and they're prone to transpersonal experiences. So, for example, transpersonal perception would be like deja vu, that feeling that, oh, this has happened before, or, you're repeating something that happened in the past, or I've heard this said exactly the same way before. Telepathy, precognition, and psychic dreams. Transpersonal influence. Now, these are interesting people. I find these people really fascinating. They do psychic healing and psychokinesis. So these are the people. The first group, transpersonal perception. Totally relate to that. I totally get that. That's when you're receiving. You're getting the information. Transpersonal influencers are people who can dish it out, and they do psychic healing and psychokinesis. They can move things around. And then there's transpersonal manifestations of the mind. These are people who can contact spirit guides, who have frequent out-of-body experiences, who have real strong past life recall, UFO sightings, near-death experiences. And all of these personality types fall into this highly sensitive type of person. There's a Dr. Elaine Aron from UC Santa Cruz who wrote The Highly Sensitive Person. She's a scientist, and she believes that there's a genetic, biological basis for this. I would argue that it's all about the wiring, So brains of people who go through this, when they're studied, show an increased blood flow in the right hemisphere, and this is correlated with internal focus. Their behavioral inhibition system in the brain dominates. Then there's those who have an inherited trait of oversensitivity. This would be my friend I was talking about. Cannot take things like going to the mall. It's just way too much. Going to a big party, being somewhere where there are lots and lots of people all at the same time. They're picking up on all this energy, and it's just too much. Over arousal. This person who is an HSP, highly sensitive people. I've always considered myself an anomaly. I've always been told I'm emotionally oversensitive. I seem hypersensitive to everything. Unnatural lighting, loud noises, hyper people, crowds, numerous odors, temperature fluctuations, you name it. I avoid malls like the plague. I'm completely overwhelmed by the commotion, crowds, and music. I feel as if I'm a sponge mopping up the emotional energy of hundreds of shoppers. My nervous system feels under attack. It's too much. The overstimulation absolutely exhausts me. I'm also hypervigilant around others. I notice every microfacial expression, every slight shift in body language. I miss nothing. Most people consider my awareness a gift. I find it to be both a gift and an exhausting curse. It may sound paradoxical that I'm able to dissociate, yet have extremely heightened awareness. Dissociation is an emotional coping method, whereas hypersensitivity is a physiological anomaly. In highly sensitive people, such as myself, these traits often coexist. This is Barbara, one of the authors. Then we have another kind of personalities. There's the hypersensitive, there's the anomalous, but then there's the fantasy-prone personality. These are people with overactive imaginations. They live in a dream world. They're always daydreaming. Their adaptive response to stress is to space out like that, and that's fewer than 4% of the general population. And their traits are people who are easily hypnotized, prone to out-of-body experiences, often psychic, have vivid dreams, have an imaginary childhood friend, no comment, have ESP. And some of these people can do automatic writing. They're usually female. They have a rich imaginary life as children. They believed in guardian angels and fairies as kids. Uh-oh. There's a strong correlation between having a fantasy-prone personality and having paranormal beliefs. And I suppose there is a portion of the population who would dismiss all of this. You're prone to fantasy. An example of this, and I thought this was hilarious, was Whitley Strieber. He's a fantasy-prone personality. This personality type existed before they had the unusual experiences. And the question here is, do they have the unusual experiences because they're that personality type and therefore more available for these experiences? The ability to experience this stuff from alternate realities is possible for them. And they're not freaks and they're not peculiar. We are not freaks or peculiar. This is just a personality type. Like I said, wiring. A world-renowned psychologist and near-death researcher, Kenneth Ring, PhD, says there are realms beyond those of consensual reality, and what the majority regards as real is only normative, not definitive. The ASP, the anomalous sensitive personality, on the other hand, tends to perceive beyond normal boundaries which have hitherto been unacknowledged by science. These insights must ultimately be recognized and legitimized. So they end this chapter by saying this is probably a genetic predisposition. This is probably an inherited trait that has to do with your neurological setup, your wiring, whatever. Chapter 3, am I inside or out of my mind? I really don't need to answer that. So these people have transcended the constraints of the three-dimensional and they're aware of the fourth dimension. May not be immediately recognize that that's what's going on, but that's what's going on. So our experiences shape and define us. So Penny, from the book, doctor, experienced a near-death experience. She had anaphylaxis, and despite using an EpiPen, and despite being in the emergency room, she stopped breathing. And she went from struggling to breathe to feeling like she was floating above her body. She saw the bustle of the emergency room staff, but she didn't feel any fear. I do believe she's a doctor. I should know this since she wrote the book, helped to write the book. No, I don't think she is. She's one of the only ones in here. She contributed. So she went from struggling to floating above her body and saw the ER staff, but wasn't worried about it. And she said she suddenly materialized in the backseat of her sister's car. And she said it was pouring rain, and her sister had this anxiety and sense of urgency, and she was driving too fast for the weather. And so she gets this, she's in a gas station, and she has this thought in her mind, the sister does, hang on, I'm coming. And Penny, the one in the coma, was in Kentucky, experienced herself as sitting in her sister's car, and later was able to confirm to her sister that she had been there and seen it all happening while she was in a coma. On the spirit side, she spent some time in a dark void, but then her grandmother came to her, and she asked her grandmother, am I dead? I'll read you what transpired. My grandmother responded, no, you aren't dead. There is no death except that the body becomes useless and it's cast away. You've heard it said that energy is not created or destroyed. It just changes form. This is true in the earthly realm and in the spirit realm. You haven't died, dear one. You've simply changed form. And, of course, she lived to tell the tale, but she met families of light beings who seemed familiar to her, like she knew them. She felt connected to all these different spirits. She saw and felt everything from her life and how it affected others, so like a life review. And then she was in a huge light, and this huge light was I am. That's how it related to her, as I am. She felt 100% love coming from it. All universal knowledge went into her DNA, and she saw that she had originated as a spark from the source, God. And the lesson that she learned from this was that our essence, our soul, continues after death in immortality. LYNN Miller had an out-of-body experience, and oftentimes she can initiate and control them. She's had out-of-body experiences all of her life. She thought they were vivid dreams, and research told her, well, no, what you've been going through is out-of-body experiences. So she learned how to induce them after about 3 to 5 hours of sleep, and it actually works. She now knows that consciousness exists outside of the body, independently of the brain, that life goes beyond three-dimensional. The body is merely a vessel, a vehicle. Consciousness is non-local. In other words, it's not only in your brain. Out-of-body experiences shift into other dimensions and times, and you're able to see parallel realities. She says you learn to release your ego, your fear. Then we have Barbara Mango, PhD, author of the book, who experienced UAPs, we'll call them UFOs, and unidentified aerial phenomena are visual stimulus reported as a light or an object in the sky with unconventional flight dynamics, and remain being identified as UFOs after they've been scrutinized by experts and there is no other explanation. So what she's saying is there's a distinction. Anything weird you see is a UAP, an unidentified aerial phenomenon. But once they've eliminated all the possible explanations, then it, process of elimination, it's a UFO. And this happened to her in 1966. It was a hot day, there was a heat wave, and she was doing yard work. And suddenly there was a huge shadow coming from overhead. And she looked up, and there was a massive cylindrical disc about the size of 2 football fields. And people always say the size of a football field. I'm not that conversant with football fields. It's a big plot of grass. So 2 of them. That's big. That's really big. And it had oval windows all around it. She had a telepathic conversation with the occupants. She was told that the universe is vast, billions of planets. She was told to share the message of peace and concern for the environment, for ecology. Now, mind you, this is 1966. And then it evaporated, and she said there was a small article in the local paper. But later citing she was given information about lunar samples that would be brought back, which was crazy in 1966, except she said that they came true. What she was told came true. She found verification decades later in Project Blue Book files that were released to the public, finally. Barbara does past life regressions, and it healed some things for her, and it taught her some lessons. Dolores Cannon started doing started doing hypnotic regression for the purposes of treating bad habits, like nail biting and cigarette smoking, and to lose weight, and to deal with phobias, like people who were afraid of going over bridges, that kind of thing. And stumbled on the realization that she was actually digging into people's past lives and took it from there. So Barbara went into this also for healing, and came out the other side with all sorts of lessons she wasn't expecting. She says that our vocabulary and our ability to understand are simply inadequate. Dr. Jim Tucker from the University of Virginia Medical Center, the Division of Perceptual Studies, says non-locality is supported thus far of quantum physics, that the physical world is affected by and even derived from the non-physical, from consciousness, and consciousness could be expressed in a new life. So what does that mean? That basically physics, new realizations in physics have supported the belief that there is a spiritual entity, an energetic entity associated with each of us and our consciousness that exists outside the body and independent of the body and can continue after the death of the body. So we live in a multi-dimensional reality. Then there's the quantum hologram theory of consciousness, and this science theory postulates that human physical and spiritual energies are together, and traditional science clings to the old paradigm of materialism that it's all dependent on the physical body. But then they make the point, well, you know, that's where the money is. That's where the scientific research grants are. And it gets the most striking results and attracts the brightest researchers, and everything else is kind of dismissed because it's not mainstream enough. But the more an idea deviates from the main paradigm, the accepted paradigm, the lower its status is scientifically and the less money it is given for research. Materialism really resists challenges, that there's a real pushback in mainstream science to expand horizons. The late philosopher Thomas Kuhn stated that the non-materialistic theory is often incongruent with the traditional model. In other words, believing that consciousness is not merely in the body, that it can exist outside and independent of the body, doesn't go along with traditional points of view. All research results that cannot be accounted for by the prevailing worldview are labeled anomalies because they threaten the existing paradigm and challenge the expectations raised by this paradigm. Needless to say, such anomalies are initially overlooked, ignored, rejected as aberrations, or even ridiculed. Let's now take a closer look at the debate between science and experiencers of NDEs, OBEs, and UAP-related contact and past life recall. How do skeptics view these phenomena, and why are the experiences insisting that they are non-local in nature? And this is a perfect place to stop because it's the end of a chapter. So that's the end of video 1. And I will be back with video number 2, and lots of interesting personal stories here, and lots of interesting research that brings science, what is that called? The Overton window. That's a real popular expression these days. They use it a lot in politics, that when you have an extreme, and the continuum of politics is extreme, and the center is right in the middle, you can push that center in one direction or the other by moving this way or moving that way, like the pressure from either direction. So if you've got a very vocal, very active, progressive branch of the left wing, they can force the centrists and the moderates to become more left wing, and vice versa. So we'll stop here and move on to video number 2, and thank you for watching Slung of Foil.